Chapter 27. Don didn't know what to think as he stood there, staring at his father's dismembered body. There was an arm here, a leg there. The torso was in the middle of the living room, and the head was elsewhere. Don felt revulsion and fear, but he did not feel sorrow. His father was dead, and he felt no sorrow, only disgust at the sight, as if he was looking at the dead body of a stranger. The paralysis vanished, and Don finally took a step forward. Was this his father in front of him? It was hard to tell without the head. A part of Don realized he wasn't responding to the situation the way a normal person would. A normal person would go running from the house, screaming. A relative would probably pass out or start crying. Don did neither. The curse must have damaged something inside of him. He was no longer human. He walked up to the torso, noting the beer belly covered by a white t-shirt smeared with blood. That looked like Stephen's torso. Don was closer to the kitchen on the right. There, he was able to see the kitchen island, where his father had made him a peach smoothie not long ago. The head was now sitting on the island. It was Stephen's head. The mouth was slightly open, the eyes glazed. The white hair on his head was sticking straight up, as if it had been grabbed. The attacker must have picked up the head by that hair. Don's stomach started to turn, and bile rose to his throat. He was starting to feel something, some emotion that had burst free and was now flooding his body violently. His father had been murdered, and Don was seeing it, feeling it. He screamed. An hour went by as Don stood there in the living room, trying to decide what to do. He knew he should call the police, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He was already linked to more murders than he liked, and there was no way he would be able to talk his way out of this one. His mind was rushing with ideas now that the shock had worn off. Stephen was dead, and there was nothing he could do about it. By whom, there was no telling yet. Stephen had said himself that no one knew he was alive, except for Aunt Cynthia and Don, as well as Don's family. Stephen may have had enemies Don knew nothing about, but he doubted this was some kind of hit. This reeked of the curse. Someone close to Don had killed Stephen. He knew that in his gut. But why kill him? Don grabbed a few trash bags from under the sink, as well as some yellow rubber cleaning gloves, and began to gather the body parts. He couldn't believe he was doing this, but there was no helping it now. He couldn't call the police, and no one save a select few had even known the old man was alive. If Don got rid of the body, no one would find out he'd been murdered. Don put all the parts into one bag, and then double and triple bagged it. He still couldn't believe his father was dead, and that he barely felt any emotion at the man's passing. But Stephen had abandoned his family, and Don barely knew him. It was hard to cry over a stranger's death. Stephen had been a familiar stranger. The kids would be devastated if they found out, so Don decided not to tell them. Unless one or both already knew. What if they had killed their grandfather? Don could count all the cursed people he knew on one hand. The demon had said it was possessing someone Don knew. He assumed it meant Connor, and it must have used Connor to find out that Stephen had still lived. It hadn't taken kindly to losing track of the man decades ago, when Stephen passed his curse on to his own father. Perhaps it wanted revenge and used Connor to get it. Don grabbed a shovel from the garage and began digging a hole in the backyard by one of the peach trees. The ground was cold and hard due to the snow, but after a while the digging got easier. He then dragged the bag out of the house and buried it. He was burying his father. Don still couldn't bring himself to mourn the way he should have. He felt little attachment to the remains in the hole. His initial scream earlier had been more of a release of horror and revulsion than anything else, and once he'd done that, he felt hollow. It was a curious feeling. As he filled the hole with snow-covered dirt, he wondered if it had been he who'd killed the old man. After finding the evidence of Mr. Lepper's murderous pastime, a weight had been lifted from Don's shoulders. He'd found out that he hadn't killed all those people in the woods and just forgotten about it. But what if he'd killed Stephen while under some strange trance? Did the demon still have some kind of hold on him? After finishing this grisly task, Don cleaned up the blood in the house, thankful for the linoleum floors, and then drove home to his family. When he returned home, he went straight to his study, locked the door, and closed the fireplace partition so no one could see him from the living room. He felt completely lost at the moment, scared for himself and his family. He had no idea what was going on, but at the same time, he did know. Connor had to be behind everything. The demon was using him to do its bidding. But for what reason? It clearly wasn't dead, but it was trapped in whatever hell it spawned from. And it was using its one link to this world. Don had to destroy that link. He knew only one way to do that, but he couldn't. Later that night, he stood outside Connor's bedroom, his head against the closed door. He had a knife in his hand. The next morning, the family had breakfast together. Connor was there, unharmed and completely oblivious to what his uncle had planned to do the night before. Don hated himself for even thinking about it, and he hated himself even more for not going through with it. Something was wrong with Dad, but Jordan couldn't figure out what it was. Dad always had his little funks, but this one seemed worse than the others. When he wasn't shut up in his study, he was in his room. This went on for 2 days, and even Mom didn't know what was going on. The family had done most of the packing, and the house was littered with large boxes filled with crap. Moving day was a week away, and instead of feeling excited, Jordan felt nervous. He'd lived in this house for so long he didn't want to leave. He loved the old architecture, the study behind the fireplace, the den being on a lower elevation than the living room. It was just a weird, wonderful house. He wouldn't miss those woods behind the house, though. He'd experienced enough of them to last a lifetime. He hoped to leave that nightmare behind. He was heading to his room when he passed Connor's. The door was cracked open, and he could see Connor sitting at his window, looking out into the front yard. It was midday, but overcast. Jordan knocked on the door. Connor turned. "Come in." Jordan pushed the door open and sat on the edge of the bed. "What's on your mind?" "Just excited about the move." "Really? You look melancholy." "Jesus, lay off the big words." Jordan laughed. "I will if you tell me what's wrong." Connor sighed. "I just feel like something bad has happened." "To who?" "I don't know. Someone I know." Jordan had started feeling the same way 2 days ago, but figured it was Dad. He told Connor so. I think it's Grandpa, Connor said. Have you tried calling him? Connor nodded. He doesn't answer. Maybe you should tell Dad. He can take us over there or something. I've tried talking to him, but he's always locked up somewhere. Yeah, I've noticed that. Maybe your mom can take us, Connor suggested. We can ask. Connor turned back to the window. Can I ask you something? Jordan suddenly found himself saying. Sure. What did you do to Jack and Leo? Really? Connor didn't turn back when he said, I don't know. I don't remember. But it was you, right? I think so. Could you have undone it if you wanted? If so, I don't know how. Grandpa helped you with whatever was going on, didn't he? Connor nodded. He helped me control my anger, my demon, he called it. He told me it couldn't control me if I didn't want it to. How did he know you had problems? He said he's been watching over us for a long time. He said he knew everything that was going on with us, and that he could make it all go away. And he did. Do you think he could do the same for me? Jordan asked. You have a demon too? Connor asked, skeptical. You've always seemed pretty tame to me. I think we all have one. Mine just lies low, waiting. It would be pretty cool if you let loose, to be honest. Connor chuckled. You're so vanilla. I can't see Aaron falling for a vanilla. I like to think I'm a swirl. She seems to like me well enough. Connor grinned. Yeah, she does, doesn't she? What about you and Travis? You seem to be getting along well again. You two going out now? Connor's grin vanished. I don't want to talk about that. Okay, sorry. No, it's okay. Thanks for taking an interest, though. It means a lot to me. You're my brother. Of course I care. Connor was a brother. The cousin title was just a technicality. Jordan loved him and didn't want to see anything bad happen to him. But he felt something bad was coming for both of them. If something had indeed happened to Grandpa, then Jordan's and Connor's powers of perception were accurate. Jordan had to trust them now. Mom drove them over to Grandpa's house an hour later. They knocked on the door and rang the bell, but no one answered. Grandpa's SUV was in the yard, so he had to be home. Jordan went around to the backyard, the snow crunching under his feet. He looked through the back porch door, but saw a dim, empty house. Connor and Mom joined him a moment later, looking around the yard. Jordan noticed a dark patch by a peach tree, but the recent snowfall had covered most of it up. Maybe he went out of town, Mom offered helpfully. I hope so, said Connor. We'll call him again in a couple of days, said Mom as she headed back to her car. Jordan and Connor followed. Jordan didn't take his eyes off the dark patch of yard until they drove away. Deirdre watched the Scotts drive away from the big house. She had followed them from their own home, a voice in the back of her mind telling her she was a crazy woman for doing so. But she had to follow her instincts, and they told her something big was happening. She had parked down the street, facing the way the Scotts were going now, so that they wouldn't pass her when they left. Now she drove up to the house and parked across the street. She walked up to the red front door and knocked. She figured no one was home, but at least she could say she tried to announce her presence if she was caught. She went around to the back and looked through the porch door. No one moved inside. She looked behind her to the rest of the yard. There was a patch of disturbed earth near a peach tree. She walked over to it. She touched it with the tip of her right boot. Somebody had dug here recently, perhaps to bury something? Deirdre faced a moment of indecision. She wanted to dig up whatever was buried, but she feared what she might find. What if there was a dead body down there? How would she explain her involvement to the cops? She turned to go. She had to think about this some more. Maybe it wasn't a body at all. It could be anything. As she walked back to her car, she noticed a small spot of red in the snow. It was between the house and the hole. It looked like blood. Oh boy.